We're smooth 98.1 FM. Good morning and welcome to Business Express. It is time to get into business. Who gets what, why, how, and what's the increase is what you might be asking this morning as we get into business conversation. My guest is waiting and looking all business-like with a great knot of a tie. The suit is dapper, but hey, just hold on. If you're on onto our YouTube channel, you can see what I'm talking about and affirm that, hey, when I read these things, you know that definitely it's not wrong. But let's move on. So let's see, you can be part of this conversation this morning if you send us a WhatsApp message, and that's on to 0809 will be where you get to send your WhatsApp message relating to the conversation this morning. Or you can also race down to YouTube, youtube.com/smooth 981 FM Lagos. Like us there, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can always come back to see this segment's past edition, and of course follow us right now and leave a comment there. What's said already, let's move on now to make welcome our guest this morning. I've got James Ola-Adisa. He's industrial analyst at Chapel Hill Denham. Good morning to you, Adisa. How are you today?
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show this morning.
And this morning, we are looking at Nigeria's 2 trillion naira federal accounts allocation committee allocation and money supply. That's what it's all about. It's looking like the increase is getting better because looking at the articles coming from Nairametrics also leading with this one, that it's up by 23%. And I see the article also from the Vanguard. So I'd like you to help us get a better, in the sense, to help us process this. For those who are not aware, what exactly is this Faac allocation to the 3 tiers of government?
All right. So, the total revenue generated in January this year of that, the Federal Account Allocation Committee disburses a certain amount of money to all 3 tiers of the government for, their budget purposes. And the federal government in February received about 407 billion. The state government received about 379 billion, and the local government received about 278 billion. And these monies are expected to cater for, their budget expenditures, their capex plans, and all the things they need money for, really. So that's what the Faac allocation is for.
So where do they get this money from? Is it just something that falls from the wind and then they all come? So let's talk, help us get into the sense of it.
Okay, so the monies come from, the various revenue generating sources of the federation. So we have, crude oil which is sold, the primary source of our FX. We have taxes, right, which the government collects and accrues to the federation's account. And the Federal Account Allocation Committee is then in charge of, disbursing that money to the different tiers of government. So really, it's all the enterprises that the government owns, all the revenue generating streams that it has that fall into one bucket, and then that bucket is then subdivided by the Faac Federal Allocation Committee, to all 3 tiers of the government.
Oh, payday streams of income. I wouldn't forget
Yeah.
this now. Let's go on to understand what you now. There's a jump in terms of what the formula is looking like. What comes into this basket or the bucket, if I use your phrase. It's experiencing a 23% increase from the last time. 2 trillion naira for the 3 tiers of government. It's looking like better days are here.
Yeah, so I mean, the 23.9% increase is, substantial, and it goes to the 3 different tiers of government, as we've mentioned, a number of times, and it reflects an improvement in revenue generation. And I think, this ties neatly into the agenda of the new administration to strengthen the revenue generating capacity of the country. And they've shown that they are in for the penny and they are in for the pound. They are going to stick to, what they are doing to the end. They are going to mobilize revenue, right? And this is clear with the 2 bold policy reforms which they've implemented and which they've, partially stuck with. The first of them is the liberalization of the FX market, right? And what that means is that FX inflows into the coffers of the federation would translate to more revenue in naira terms. And the second is, the partial removal of fuel subsidy. What this has done is it has eased the burden of, on the country's finances. So, in my view, I think it's really positive for, 3 tiers of the government.
Now, this ties into what NAITI, that's the Transparency Initiative, the report presented by its Executive Secretary, Dr. Bonaya Orji, who's talked about looking at what 36 states of the Federation include the FCT there also, and then look at 774 local government areas would experience this 23% increase in terms of revenue to about 10.14 trillion in 2023. What do you make of this increase?
The increase fundamentally reflects the factors which I mentioned earlier. So, we have the FX liberalization and we also have the subsidy removal. But I think even going beyond this, it calls for much more public scrutiny of the different tiers of the government. So a 24% increase in Faac payments to around 2 trillion naira, as you said, isn't really a small amount of money. In absolute terms, it's actually quite significant, right? And so this increase in Faac payments means that public finances are now in the hands of our leaders. And we ought to know where these funds are being channeled into. Are they being used for productive ventures? And I think it's really where our focus should be. At the federal level, at the state level, at the local government levels, much more accountability is required, right? But these policy reforms have affected the cost of living of the average Nigerian. And the argument is that with these bottlenecks, so I'm talking about the removal of fuel subsidy, we would expect to see much more revenue being channeled into productive projects, because if they are not channeled into productive projects, we would not see over the long term an increase or a drive in economic activity. So I think it's really necessary that we pay attention to the increase in Faac payments and how it is spent.
So let's metaphorically look at this now. Let's look at Nigeria as a family. Father called the family meeting to say, what, revenue is not looking good. So milk will be missing from the beverage or probably the tea in the mornings until revenue stabilizes. So bringing it back to this increase, could this be like Nigerians should be looking forward to milk returning to the tea, and then probably the number of meat we enjoy during meal times would be better? So in essence, should Nigeria expect more from their government in the different tiers of the country with this increase?
I think that's a really great question, and I'll tell you why. Apart from the fact that it builds on what I mentioned earlier, right? We can only expect more if sizable Faac payments are channeled to productive projects. Faac is a reflection of fiscal spending. And if fiscal spending is directed towards productive projects, then, you will see economic growth. I think one thing we ought to also keep at the back of our minds is that the benefits that would accrue to each and every one of us with proper deployment of these funds is not something that we would see overnight, or something that we would see over a week, or even a couple of months. But over the long term, if we're able to stick to this, we can see it translate to economic growth. So these are the areas the government should really look into. But the reality on ground right now is that most of the money goes into recurrent expenditure, so like salary payments. So unless it's really channeled into productive ventures, I think we should moderate our expectations.
Oh, so it's not even a case of Charles Dickens' great expectations then. All right, let's see it from this way. To whom much is given, to whom less is given, so we should say less is expected. But now we see more being given to the states right now. So would it be, we should expect more from them, not dampen our expectations.
Yes, I think so. I think you're spot on with that. I think we need to expect them to do the right things. I think we need to hold governments accountable for how they spend this fund. And I think at this point, in the growth of Nigeria, we have to understand that we need to be more productive. We have the capacity to do so, right? We just need to channel the resources into the right places, and that would translate to economic activity and economic growth for the country. And I think it's very important.
Now, there's a worry concerning this, because as they go to Abuja and these allocations are announced, it means one implication for the economies. They are worried. The supply of money in the economy. Aren't you worried about that? What does it say about inflation? Should we be scared?
So, the numbers don't lie. Once you look at the numbers, you understand the story. So, based on my analysis, what I see is that there's around an 86% correlation between Faac and broad money, M3, and this 86% tells us that there is a strong correlation between Faac and broad money. And really, if you think about it intuitively, Faac inflows add to money stock. So the concerns are valid. With an increase in Faac payments, we would see an increase in, broad money supply.
All right, so this leads us to money supply in Nigeria apparently grew from 9 trillion naira in January 2009 to 92 trillion naira in January 2024. And is rising inflation the main cause of increased money supply without production to match it?
So, the idea is this. We have cost-pushed inflation and we have demand-pulled inflation. And, legacy challenges like poor infrastructure, insecurity, these things have contributed to inflation in Nigeria. Now, they remain a primary driver of cost-pushed inflation. But on the other hand, we have demand-pulled inflation. And this is a function of, demand sort of outweighing supply, or in this case, plenty money chasing few goods. So with money supply growing by 76.4%, it's safe to say that there's an element of demand pull inflation. And I think what is even much more interesting is, like I said, if you look at the numbers, you see that, within the same period when money supply grew by about 76.4% year on year, we saw that Faac inflows to states and local governments, which flows into the financial system, which affects money supply, increased by about 31.5% year on year. And interestingly, within a similar period, inflation has risen by about 31.7%. So while our production capacity really is hampered by, legacy challenges, legacy issues, money supply is also fueling rising inflation rates.
So if you just joined in, I'm speaking with James Ola-Adisa, industrial analyst, Chapel Hill, Denham, speaking with us this morning. It's all relating to the recent Faac allocation, Nigeria's 2 trillion naira Faac allocation and money supply, and sundry issues that would arise with the increase of money going down to the 3 tiers of government. What should we expect from this as a result of this increase? So we've been looking at all of that, but we've got just 2 more questions to clear your tray, and then we'll get to a few messages we see here. So how do we bring money supply down? Is that up to the Central Bank of Nigeria, that's the CBN?
Well, as I explained earlier, so money supply is the driver of inflation, and it's the mandate of the CBN to ensure price stability, to keep inflation in check, to ensure that it grows at a low and stable rate. And as a result of that, really the burden rests on the shoulders of the CBN to properly manage money supply. Thankfully, we have a CBN governor who understands this, right? And we've seen him, sterilize excess liquidity through OMO auctions, through excess NCB issuances. So at the past auctions, we've seen them front load NCB issuances and CR debits. And if you look at the last NCB auction and OMO auction, we saw subscription levels. So the amount of money that people brought for the auction was around 1 trillion naira. And, looking at bank balances, looking at system liquidity, it was really in a net short position. So that shows that they are able to offer rates which are attractive enough to pull out excess liquidity from the financial system. In other words, they are trying to manage money supply. In my view, I think if we continue on this path, in terms of demand pull inflation, the CBN will definitely, have a handle on things. They'll be able to bring down money supply, and, we would have a handle on inflation in turn. It's expensive, really. It's also difficult, but it's necessary.
Final question. Let's get this in. So if this money supply continues to increase as a result of Faac revenue looking well, as a result of the measures, policies being implemented by the federal government, what are the consequences if you do this in about less than a minute?
So the consequences, I think the primary consequence of an increase in money supply is higher inflation. And in my view, I think that reining in inflation is reason enough for the growth in money supply to be, given critical attention. An offshoot of higher inflation is further depreciation in the currency. And I don't think it's new to anyone, the ripple effects that this would have on the economy. It can be severe. We've seen what has happened so far. So to curb, inflation, the monetary and fiscal authorities, they need to be in sync. They need to ensure that, money supply doesn't run wild. I think that, if this consequence is treated and is effectively managed, then, we will be able to see an improvement in inflation, and, money supply will be under the control of the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Thank you very much. Let's go to see messages we've got here, a couple of them here. Tayo sends in a message and it says, why don't we don't have a generating problem. We have a spending problem. Government would generate such amount, but there is no explanation or accountability on spending. We can only wonder why. States need to be innovative, not rely significantly on Faac money. Then our final message comes in from Fine Oluboroko, says, well, your guest just nailed it for me. The major reason for we're seeing increase to the tune of 2 trillion naira in terms of Faac revenue being shared by the 3 tiers of government, being shared by it says, is simply due to FX liberalization and fuel subsidy removal. However, food inflation is on the rise, running riot, and that's what concerns Nigerians. And it goes on to take it home, it being power. Fine Boroko's message this morning. And so it's on this note, we want to say thank you so much to our guest this morning from Industrial Analyst at Chapel Hill, Denham, and that's James Ola-Adisa. Have yourself a great, profitable morning.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day too.
Yeah, bye.